Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I think for the purpose of time, we're going to go ahead and get started with this morning's workshop. I want to welcome everyone to this morning's PDHP workshop on response, quality assessment, and surveys. I'm going to give a more formal introduction to our workshop presenters here in a couple minutes. But first, just wanted to introduce everybody to the Population Dynamics and Health program that's sponsoring today's workshop. So this is a research infrastructure program within the Population Studies Center here at the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. And workshops are only one of the many services that the PDHP provides. My name is Brady West, and I'm the director of the Scientific and Technical Core of the PDHP, which provides consulting on statistics, data science, research design, research methodology. And the Scientific and Technical Core puts together these different workshops, inviting speakers and providing information and content that will hopefully benefit as many researchers as possible who are working in population science and population health. So we also have, as part of the PDHP services, a YouTube playlist where you can find videos from our past workshops. I'm just clicking on that playlist right now to show you on the screen. But you can go back in history and look at recordings of any of the workshops that PDHP has offered in the past. And you can also find materials for those workshops in our workshop archive on the PDHP website. So if you're interested in today's workshop and you want to go back and see some of the other content that we've put on, you're more than welcome to visit this YouTube page and check out some of the prior workshops that we have offered. So please feel free to do that at your leisure. And I think you'll find a variety of very interesting topics that have been covered in the past. So as I mentioned, the Scientific and Technical Core also provides statistical consulting. We also engage in subcontract work. So if you're interested in hiring PDHP and our analysts to support you with your own research, you're more than welcome to reach out to PDHP and we can work on setting up that kind of arrangement. We've engaged in a variety of projects, both nationally and internationally in the past, to help people with different aspects, again, of research design, data collection, data analysis, whatever you might need to advance your research. We're more than happy to talk about that. PDHP also offers mentorship and small grant programs. So when you go to the PDHP website, you'll see links at the top that will take you to sites where you can find more details about these different aspects of our services. So for example, this new investigator mentoring program, we just went through the review of applications to that program, and we're starting off with the new investigators that were selected from that mentoring program very soon in the near future. So you can read a little bit more about that. We have a very active small grants program. So if you need small grants to help support your research, you're more than welcome to read more about these and reach out if you have any questions. You can also apply to be an affiliate of PDHP if you'd like to be an affiliate and receive consulting and some of these other services and be kept in the loop about different activities and different services that PDHP is going to be offering. So again, you can browse the website at your leisure, read more about what we do, and you're more than welcome to reach out if you'd like to explore any of these services in more detail. Okay, so for today's workshop, again, the title of our workshop is going to be Response, Quality Assessment, and Surveys. I'd like to turn to introducing our two speakers for today. So Fabienne Kramer is joining us online. So she's going to be offering parts of the workshop online. Fabienne's a research associate at the Survey Design and Methodology Department at GESIS, the Leibniz Institute for Social Sciences in Mannheim, Germany. Her research interests include data quality of different data types, the statistical modeling of data quality aspects, and survey methodology. We also have with us Henning Silber. Henning is a research assistant professor in the Survey Methodology program, which is located within the Survey Research Center here at ISR on the U of M Ann Arbor campus. He earned his PhD from the University of Göttingen and completed his habilitation at the University of Mannheim, both in Germany. After completing his PhD, he worked as a postdoc and then a team leader in survey operations in the Department of Survey Methodology at GESIS. Henning's research interests include survey methods, combining surveys with other data types, meta-research, and substantive topics such as social networks and health. So at this point, I will go ahead and turn it over to Henning and Fabienne, and we look forward to a good workshop this morning. Thanks, everybody.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction. I will jump right in. Let's see if it works here. So we have basically two parts of this workshop. The first will be covered by me, which gives an overview of concepts related to response quality, such as the cognitive response process, total survey error, survey satisficing, response styles, and attention checks, because they become more frequently used, as we will discuss during the workshop. And in the second part, we have a hands-on practice using R with examples from the Codex project, which is a fairly large project that is currently going on in Germany. It's a collaboration between GESIS, University of Mannheim, and LMU University in Munich. And within that project, they develop a data quality toolbox with basically mainly code examples and tutorials for measuring data quality, not only of survey data, but also of other data. So feel free to check that out. And Fabienne works mainly on survey data, and in that context, she has developed already her first tutorial, which she will present within this workshop. Okay, so I would like to start with an expert survey here on what means data quality for scientists. And if I would ask people participating in that workshop, everyone would probably say something different or come up with 10 or 20 different aspects. And there's a variety of topics you can think of, things for everyone, something else might be important. So the concept is very complex, and it's also not so well defined. However, those researchers tried to structure that in some way, and they came up with 4 dimensions. One is intrinsic data quality, which is related to believability and accuracy. Then there's contextual data quality, which is related to value added or timelessness. When there is representational data quality, it's about interpretability, ease of understanding, concise representation, and accessibility, whether the data is, for instance, freely accessible or secured. So even so, the concept is very broad. There are certainly some ways to organize that. And today we will talk exclusively about intrinsic data quality, and also there are different concepts, I think, that are needed as a background to understand and talk about response quality. In the survey landscape has changed over the past year. This is data from Germany from 2000 to 2021, and it's data from the Association for German Market and Social Research Institutes. And what you can see is that in 2000, telephone and also face-to-face were the dominant modes of data collection, and online just started. But in about 2010, online survey took over, and nowadays it's basically uncontested. It has much more market share than any other mode. And I also checked the data for 2022 and 3. It just went higher up, so maybe it's now at 70%. We have to consider online service, and why that is important is that for online service, we don't have interviewers that can help respondents to stay motivated during the survey process, that can also kind of observe what is happening. And it's just someone being mainly at home, filling out the survey. This person might be distracted by other things. So I think this rise of online service, also amount of service that are taken today, that heavily contributes to worries about data quality or response quality. By the way, feel free to ask questions in between. We are in a hybrid mode. I will be presenting from Michigan here. Fabienne is in Utrecht at the moment. And we have also a few participants here in person. I think, more online. So Paul will observe the chat and can just read your questions, but also feel free to unmute yourself and speak if you want. So anytime you have questions, please go ahead. And this is data from an expert survey from WAPO and ESOMAR, which are global organizations for public opinion research and market research. And what you can see here is also a mode comparison that, for instance, since we are today in the United States, there's a lot of pink on this map, and which is online and web. So the dominant mode of data collection in the United States is also online, as is in most parts of Europe and Australia. However, in many countries around the world, telephone is still, or was still, at least in 2022, I think this survey was conducted, according to the experts, the dominant mode of data collection. And in other areas, such as, for instance, Africa, face-to-face is also used very heavily. However, I think it's not too far to say that in the future it will turn more and more toward online in every country. And in recent time, this is in 2020, more and more articles have come up that questions the data quality in online studies, particularly in studies related to Amazon Mechanical Turk, but also other panels where respondents might be not so motivated to fill out the surveys carefully. And a topic that has been heavily discussed in the literature is professional respondents, and do those kind of online panels where people, as we'll see, answer many surveys, sometimes even a survey a day. This is the first graph here from Sunshine Hilligas from 2014. And you can see here how many surveys do people answer, has someone answered in the last 4 weeks, and some people say 200 or 250 surveys. So that's more than a survey a day. And on average, it was 4.5, so more than 1 a week. These are participants of online panels, so it's maybe not surprising that they answer surveys frequently, but still that's the population many researchers work with. And they are experienced in filling out surveys, maybe more experienced than the scientists that develop the surveys. And also many people of those online panels take part in multiple online panels. In that study, we found that 50% of the people reported to participate in more than one panel, and the average was above 2. This is a study from the Netherlands, which gives also more information on participation in multiple panels. They looked at 7 panels and used the zip code and the birth date of the people to kind of match them. And what we found was that only in one panel there was only 1% of respondents being part in other panels, but in all other panels we found matches of 15% or more, and one time even 25% of matches. And since the method is not perfect, you could even think that we might have underestimated the amount of matches. Yeah. This is part of my own research. I looked here at participation motives of people from a German online panel and a German sample recruited with random methodology, which we called a non-professional sample. And what we looked here into here was participation motives, and we found that people from the random sample were mostly intrinsically motivated, so they're often they selected purpose and topic as participation motives, also the sponsor, while of professional respondents, this is based on a cluster analysis. In 3 of the 4 clusters rated here incentives very highly, or had a high likelihood to have incentives rated highly. They also select a topic very often, so it seems, at least for this sample, that according to the reports, it's both. It's the incentives, but also interest in the topic. So they're intrinsically and extrinsically motivated. But it's still striking that for the non-random sample, this incentives did not seem not to have played a big role, at least to the reports. It's always the question, we will also get into that, if people answer those questions honestly, and if they admit that incentives is one of the main reasons. However, that's what the data says. And this is a study from the United States, actually conducted here in Michigan, where we also looked into panel participation reasons, and they gave 3 different reasons to select from, which was voice to be heard, for fun, and for money. And this is again a sample of a non-probability online panel, and many people selected for money here as a reason. However, they categorized or grouped each survey in 3 groups. One was a novice sample with people who only are member of one panel, and I think it took in the last year less than 30 surveys, or in the last 2 years or something like that. And for those, they also selected quite often for their voice to be heard. However, in the professional sample, I think the criteria was here more than one panel, or even like 3 panels, and more than 200 surveys or so. So for them, the financial aspect was the most important. So we have probably both groups in online panels or in online survey research. People who take part because of the incentives only, and people who take part of the incentives too, but also because of other reasons. So far, any questions? Okay, then let's go to the cognitive response process. I think to understand response quality is important to think how people answer survey questions. And there have been quite a few models to understand that better. And this is a very early model from Cannell and colleagues, published in Sociological Methods and Research in 1981. And they describe the response process as including 5 or 6 steps. Those steps on the bottom would be the optimal response process. Someone reads the survey question, comprehends the question, retrieves information from the memory to answer that, evaluates that information to build his or her opinion, and also thinks there are some like goals in terms of like answering the questions, and in the 5th stage, they would or this person would give a response. However, in each of that steps, there can be modifications to the response. So it can be due to the interviewer, to how the interviewer looks, or how the behavior is. If the interviewer looks like critical, you might be less willing to admit that you have done something, or if the interviewer is very friendly, you might be more willing. Then the question itself might have certain characteristics that interfere with the response process or support it, and also the respondents' goals, beliefs, and attitudes might interfere. And yeah, sure.
So I'll just read this. Are there any associations between participation motives and the response quality? You're getting into that a little bit now, but
that's a really good question. I would say I will cover the topic, that we can come back to that question when we talk about it, and you can see if there are like more questions. but I can already spoiler that yes, there are. Yeah. So, and there are certain biases that can derive from interference of each of these aspects, which is conformity bias, social desirability bias, acquiescence bias. I will also cover most of them later. Maybe just very quick conformity bias, where you would be answer in confirmation with, for instance, a statement, social desirability bias. You would avoid admitting an undesired behavior, or like undesired that you like litter or something, and a desired behavior would be voting, and you would over-report that. And acquiescence is basically a tendency to agree to statements regardless of the content, just because they are offered in a agree-disagree format. When there's a very similar response process model that was suggested by Torango and colleagues, and I think others have also similar models, and it's in a sense very similar. It simplifies the process a little bit. It also says that a question has to have a comprehension. There's a retrieval process, there's a judgment process, and a response process. I think what Torango does is to integrate those errors a little bit more into this specific components, instead of having them as an extra in the model. Okay, that as a background, and I want to now refer to another very central concept for understanding survey research, and particularly also response quality, which is the total survey error. And the total survey error models survey error on specific aspects. It doesn't cover only response quality, but also sampling, coverage, and so on. It has two big arms under the mean square error, under the error, and under survey error, which is the error variance. So it's kind of random error, some fluttering, and bias, which is systematic error. And there is, for instance, as I said, systematic coverage bias. If someone, for instance, in the online survey, people without online access would not be covered, and that would be a systematic coverage bias. Or in non-response, with respect to non-response, some people might systematically not take part. So, for instance, if you send interviews out from 8 to 4, and someone, a certain group that works in that time are not available, then they would not be covered, and there would be a systematic non-response bias. And if your sample frame or your sampling method somehow also excludes systematically certain population groups, then that is sampling bias. And we have the same with measurement bias. If there are systematic measurement errors, response errors, then we would call that measurement or response bias. This was the total survey error was put forward also in Michigan by Cruz, and he basically introduces that measurement bias and response bias is the same concept, so he would not distinguish between them. Do we have a question online, or is that still the...
No, this is the same one from before.
Okay, good. So I just want to give a brief example of measurement or response bias. And this is one from a book that I can recommend on questionnaire design from Schumann and Presser. And what they show here is that the question wording can really change the responses you get. So they did a split ballot experiment, which is always a good way, I think, to understand response errors. That one group gets one version of the question, the other group gets the other version. And here one group got the version, do you think the United States should forbid speeches in favor of communism? And the second group got the question, do you think the United States should allow speeches in favor of communism? So they basically only change the word forbid or allow. And as you can see here, the responses were very different. So 40% said yes, that should be forbidden, and 56% said no, that should not be allowed. It's not a completely clean experiment. Maybe someone want to comment on that, why it's not absolutely clean. So what I mean by that, it's not absolutely clean. You would ideally compare a yes answer against a yes answer. And here you compare no, it should not be allowed, to yes, it should be forbidden. So you don't really know if the forbid allow difference results in this 16 or 17% difference, or that one question asked yes first and the other asked kind of no first. So it's probably a mix of both. I still think the forbid allow effect is likely. We don't know with that data, likely the stronger effect, but it's a mixture of both. But in any case, even if there are two stimuli changed here, it shows how strongly slight changes in the wording can affect the results you get. And it's a little bit like day and night. So in one version, you would think less than 50% think that should be forbidden, and in the other version, you think it's more than 50%, and clearly more. And groups distinguish four parts or four sources of measurement error, and here comes survey mode also. One is the questionnaire, one are respondents, then interviewers, and the survey mode. Let's start with the questionnaire, and that can be the question wording, as we saw, or for instance, also that some respondents don't know certain words. Then the question structure. So how long is the question? Is it like a question in the closed or open format? Does it have explicit don't know categories? And many other aspects of questions that could be different. But also some questionnaire issues, such as effects of the question order, for instance, or the position of the question in the questionnaire. And I have also some more examples on that, which Groves gave. And here it's about knowledge of words. So we have basically attitude questions to which people gave their opinion, and where they were after that asked if they knew what minimum wage, what fair trade laws, and so on means. And people who had a correct and incorrect definition in mind, they were very likely to answer all four attitude questions. But also people who admitted that they didn't really know it responded for many of the attitude questions anyway. So you have people who don't know really what the question is about, but they still give responses. And it was only for the fair trade issue where that was really low, where people allowed themselves to basically admit that they don't know what that means really. But for other questions like government bond, people just answered. So you can also see how that will create, if it's a topic that people don't know so much about, but think they should know it, how much response error that might create. Here's another issue regarding question length. So these are reports from physicians and patients about chronic diseases. And this study found a stronger agreement, particularly with respect to patients, when the question was longer. So when more was explained what the issue is, the more those two parties that obviously had the exam together agreed on the issue. Correlation was higher. whereas in the short version of the question it was lower. There's still agreement, but yeah, so the better the situation was explained, the stronger was the correlation. And this is one of the many examples of question order. I think that is often underestimated in questionnaires, how large the effects of question order can be. In online service, we have often the option to randomize response order, and I would really recommend people to consider that, and or strategically planning the question order in the questionnaires. So this is an example of young drivers and drivers in general, and whether people think that the standards have gone down of driving, and for the young drivers, it didn't really matter if it was in this question sequence, the first question or the second, 35% thought the standards have gone down, but for drivers in general, it really matters. So when it was placed as the second question, there were much less people saying that it has gone down. And this is likely because they somehow people somehow respond, somehow contrast the result on young drivers with drivers in general. So they already said it has gone down for young drivers, but for old drivers it didn't go down so much. So then that would be asked second in the sequence. That's also a general rule to have, if you have a general question and you have a question that is more specific, to always ask a general question first, because that is less likely to cause effects on the specific question than the other way around. Okay, that's, or are there any questions so far? No, okay. Then let's get to respondents. Characteristics of respondents play a role, such as age, experience, motivation. We'll talk about that a lot. Then how they react in absence of knowledge. We had an example of that already. Question comprehension, retrieval, so basically the entire response process and how we react there, whether we use heuristics such as anchoring, whether they implement some response tendency, acquiescence, social desirable responding. And I also have some examples for that here. And here you can see how the recall period mattered. So this was about a vehicle accident, mostly probably cars. And if the accident was something about like less than 3 months ago, then most people remembered that and reported that. But if it was already 9 to 12 months ago, then about 30% failed to report that. So they might have just forgotten that maybe it was a small accident. Maybe there's also more pressure to like forget, purposely forget about accidents that are later, but recall definitely plays a role. Then there's socially desirable responding. We already talked about that a little bit, but here Bradburn and Zadman basically compared records of the people they interviewed about voting, having a library card and being registered to vote, and they found partially huge differences to what they reported in comparison to what the records showed, and also with respect to bankruptcy and drunken driving. So this was heavily underreported. You see that the samples here are quite small. I think that's because we really went out and checked the records, and it's not so easy to do that for so many people, particularly for bankruptcy and drunken driving. And that's why there were only about 30 to 40 people in that study. And here's another example that relates to respondents' age and again, recalls and recognition. And on the one hand, so the people were asked to basically recall the number of physical functions they just went through an exercise, and they also were asked to recognize 10 among 20 questions that were just asked, and the bias or the amount of questions that could be recalled and the amount of physical tasks went heavily down by age. So it was heavily related to age, which is probably a measure of cognitive ability, and it was the best for people between 20 and 39. Let's come to the next topic, interviewers. Interviewer characteristics you can see similar as respondents' characteristics, like things to consider like age, gender, race, experience, training, motivation. There's also the interaction between respondents and interviewers. We will talk about that also a little bit. And there are also interviewer expectations. And as with everything in our daily life, also in surveys, expectations of a person who is a huge part of the interview. If there's an interviewer, that person takes the response mainly through the entire interview. Those expectations matter, not only the presence, but also the expectations. And interviewer behavior matters, whether they comply to training guidelines, to instructions. That can make quite large differences. And here you can see an example where responses were structured by the training program interviewers went through. And as you can see, for instance, here, just let's go in the line with reading questions as worded, which is in the middle of the table, and interviews with half a day training read 30% of the questions as worded, whereas interviews with 2 days training already read 83% questions as worded, and interviews with 10-day training also read like 84% of the questions as worded. So already 2 days of interview training compared to half a day made a huge difference here. And going for all the numbers, I think the 10-day training didn't really, at least in this metric, there might be other metrics that suggest that the 10 days might be still helpful, but in those metrics, already 2 or 5 days were very helpful for interviews. But it shows also that half a day was not enough for them to administer the survey in a good way that is standardized and comparable across respondents. So that half a day interview training would introduce a lot of error in this study. When there's a study that looked into feedback on don't knows, which is kind of tricky because you also want to have the questionnaire very standardized. However, you also want on key questions answers from respondents, and here in the study, interviewers were at least in one experimental group asked to prompt respondents for an answer. So if someone said, "I don't know how much TV I watched yesterday," then they were asked, "Do you really don't know? Maybe you can like guess how much you watched." And it worked, at least for TV. It worked very well. 20% more people gave a response where the radio didn't work so well, or people just knew how much radio they watched, and but for newspaper it worked a little bit. But especially for TV, that feedback from the interviewers helped to get probably a more accurate response. And here is an example of race of the interviewer, and in this study, white respondents were interviewed by black or white interviewer, interviewers about attitudes on racial issues, and one was, for instance, about marriage. And if there was a black interviewer, people reported much less prejudice compared to when a white interviewer went there, and that was a striking difference in that study by 45%. And in each of the questions, the differences were quite large. All right, now we come to survey mode. There was a question about that earlier. There can be effects of the questionnaire, basically the response and the interviews are all three aspects we talked about before somehow interact with mode. Just because modes can be very different, there are also modes that are more similar. So if you have different self-administered mode, such as mail and online, they would be more similar compared to interviewer-administered modes. And for instance, also studies show that having a personal interview and having a personal interview via video are quite similar, because you have the interviewer there in both cases, and they can help, whereas telephone interviews is something different, because a response only hears the questions and for answers, but can't see them. So that is a very different mode. And respondents' motivation might be very different depending on the mode. And we talked about interviews. However, it's very tricky to find out whether there was really effect of the mode in mixed mode studies, because there you have also something like mode selection effects, which means that respondents get offered different modes and they choose a mode. And you basically, it's hard to tell whether you find differences because people who like sports more prefer to come to an interview in person instead of online, for instance, or whether the question was asked differently online and face-to-face, for instance, and that's why you have differences. So, and then there are the substantive differences, which are also hard to know whether they are there. So this identifying mode effects is quite tricky. Before I go into the example of the mode effects, was there a specific question about survey modes? Something maybe to the person that asked that question?
They were asking about motives, not modes.
Ah, motives. Oh, I misunderstood that. Well, maybe I can say something to that. Okay, if there were well, I think many studies show. I think we kind of established that motives of persons that are selected randomly to take part in surveys are different than people who select themselves for online panels, and many of the data quality problems we will talk today about and which are out there are coming from persons that at least have as one of the reasons to take part in surveys is the incentive, and where clearly that seems to clearly affect response quality, the motives. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
I think they were saying, like, you know, if you respond because of incentives, would you see a different distribution of responses as opposed to if you responded because you were hoping to have your voice?
Yeah,
some kind of evidence like that.
Right. I think I don't have a study in my mind who did that. I mean, maybe Sang and Conrad looked into that, but I would think you would find that often. But it's a good question, yeah. Okay, let's continue with mode. Here you can see the preferred mode depending on the mode people answered. So that was also experiment done in the United States by Groves himself. And what he found that was, if you look at the SRC results, that for face-to-face surveys, people who answered in face-to-face also prefer the face-to-face mode. People who answered via telephone clearly prefer telephone, not as much as the people who answer face-to-face, but for instance, the people who answered face-to-face could not imagine to answer by telephone or in other modes than face-to-face, telephone and mail, whereas people who answered via telephone were different in that aspect. So it seems like you reach really different people depending on the mode of data collection. Then there were also different answers to health questions with respect to the survey mode. Here again a comparison of telephone and face-to-face, and people seem to report more socially undesirable health behaviors, such as the number of for instance, like limitation of activity was reported more often in telephone service than in face-to-face service, where the pressure might be more to answer according to norms and say I'm still very active. I don't have problems with activities. Any questions to the total survey error? If not, I would come now to survey satisficing. Survey satisficing relates again to the cognitive response process. The contradiction of that term is optimizing. Someone optimizes if he or she goes through all the steps optimally, gives the optimal response at that time. And satisfying describes when there are some shortcuts in the response process. There are three main variables that are related to service satisficing, which is the task difficulty, how difficult is the response task. For instance, if the question is very short and provides not much information, the task gets also more complicated than if it's well defined. However, if the question has more words, it's also more to read, which makes it also a little bit more difficult. When there's a response motivation ability, and the lower that is, the more likely are shortcuts, or the higher that is, the less likely are shortcuts in the response process to a question or to multiple questions. There are two types of satisficing. One is weak satisficing, where people would only go through some steps or one step partially of the cognitive response process. For instance, response order, they go maybe through everything optimally, but when we report the answer in the last step, they tend to select a category that is, in an online survey, for instance, higher up, because they don't want to go through the process of reading again all the response categories. And if they find one that kind of reflects their answer, then they select that. And with acquiescence, it might be even not that for this agreement effects that people are so much aware of it. They just the question offers the yes or no, or I agree with that. Basically, almost everyone might have a tendency to agree to that. And then there is strong satisficing, which says that the response process might be completely interrupted. Several steps might be skipped. So, for instance, a respondent would just select "don't know," and you have if you have a battery, that person would click the same response for that battery, or would endorse the status quo, would not think about other other opinions that might be relevant for the person, but just agree with what is written there, or just coin flip the answer also again without paying much attention to the content. The satisfies theory has been quite influential since its introduction, which is shown by a relatively recent systematic review on the topic by Caroline Roberts and colleagues. And they identified 950 articles that mentioned satisficing, and they identified 140 methodological articles between 1987 and 2015, and that were the ones that they used for the further analysis. And in those 141 articles, we found quite a very different operationalization of the different aspects of satisficing, such as for task difficulty, for response ability, for ability you could, for instance, use age, and there are different operationalization of age. You could have some cognitive skill test and use that. You could also try to use age to measure cognitive sophistication when there are other experiences which might be more related, for instance, to a response tasks, such as how many surveys took a person before, and so on. And quite different ways to operationalize that. And then we looked in the next step if the main the main suggestions, the main assumptions of the theory are met. Do we find response order effects? Do we find acquiescence? Do we find people saying don't know? And there are some contradictory findings, but overall there were more supporting findings for theory. But it also shows that it doesn't apply in every sample. It doesn't apply for every question. So those are tendencies you might find, but you wouldn't find them everywhere. But in general, it also shows that the theory identifies problems that are really out there and that you should consider when thinking about response quality. I just want to show some results from a study I conducted together with Fabienne and colleagues from the Netherlands and Germany, where we looked at satisficing over time. We looked at response order, at acquiescence, and at don't know responses. We used a non-probability online panel for that. And here are the questions we looked at. With respect to response order, we looked at a question about adequate housing. And I won't read it completely, but we just switched the response options. So one group got the state should provide adequate housing first, and the second group received the response option about everyone should take care of their own housing first. And what we would expect is every time a response category is offered first, we would expect that is more often selected by respondents. For acquiescence, we had the same questions either in agree-disagree format or in a construct-specific format. So one, it's here about crime, and one would say individuals are more to blame in social conditions for crime and lawlessness in this country, and answer options were agree and disagree. And in the construct-specific, we had individuals in social conditions basically as response categories and not agree and disagree. And in the third question I want to show you, which is about don't know, we introduced the don't know category to a question about courts, which asks whether they are too tough or not tough enough. And again, we would expect that some people might use that out with the don't know option if it's offered. And here you can see the design. I will not introduce results of the full design here, but only show you results with respect to basically the upper group which received the question 6 times. You also changed the interval. I will also not go into that. So how long the distance was between the different waves. But just to look at the results for the 6 waves. And what we found was here for response order, we found a response order effect in every wave. Basically, for the first wave, people who got asked state first endorsed that with 78%, and if it was stated second, it was only 50%. So there was like almost 30% difference just because of response order. In other ways, that effect was not as strong, but still the lowest we found were 14% in wave 6. Yeah.
So Henning, a question, I mean, you're showing these effects,
Yeah.
right? So it's clear that if they have the state listed first, that they're more likely to say the state. But from these results, how do you tell which response is of higher quality? Like, how do you know that just because state's listed first and they're saying state, like,
Right.
which estimate would you trust of these two? I mean, it's interesting to show that there's an effect of the way you order, but
Yeah.
you know, if you were to rewrite the survey, which question would you use?
That's a very good question, yeah. So and I think that's one of the critics of doing those kind of experiments, because you don't have like a true value here. You just show what difference can be.
So what would you say? Result? Like if somebody said, okay, you did this huge study.
Yeah.
I want to do a study that asks about housing. Like,
Right.
what would you tell them?
That's a very good. I mean, you could say you have to. So what people do in these cases, I think they often randomize the response options to have like more like variance than bias. So that is a possibility, and I think that's most often applied in those cases. But a good point. Yeah. But there is really no. I think for this there's no really good solution. Yeah? You just get any way you ask it, you get some bias. Yeah? And to also show that briefly, there was also agreement effect in each wave. We didn't find like stronger agreement effects, but we found that if a question was stated in a agree-disagree format, then it was selected more often. And here it's more easy to give a recommendation. You should probably avoid agree-disagree formats if you can, because the construct-specific don't introduce that agreement bias. And with respect to don't knows, the people select don't know with up to 20% if it's offered. And there's also a more straightforward recommendation for don't knows, which is that people should not get usually that out. So you should, particularly if they are allowed to just click through an online survey or to volunteer don't know in an interview administered survey, you should offer that option only if it's really important to do it, for instance, for questions that really many people don't know about, such as the fair trades issue that we had, or questions on knowledge where it will disturb response if you don't offer that category. But it's not recommended to just include it in every question, because people will select that to shortcut the response process. All right. Those were all examples on single questions, but I think there are much more response quality issues on multi-item measures. And I will get into that in a second. I think we might have, I'm not sure how we do time-wise, but we have like a 3 or 4 minutes break.
Up to you, yeah. Whenever you feel like it's a good time for a break, we can do that.
What do people online think? Should we go on or?
like a 10-minute break and we'll come back, or however long you want. 5 minutes maybe?
Yeah, let's do a 5 minutes break and let's meet again at 10 after 10.